Hello and welcome back to Every Horror Movie on A24. We are continuing our little format shift as the SAG strike is continuing. The writer's strike is over, but until the actors get a fair deal from the studios, we are going to continue staying off our usual platform from which we review horror movies, which shall remain unnamed today. I'm Patrick. I'm here as usual with Chris.
Hello.
And Steven.
Hey, and I think you dropped Blu-ray from the title of the show, Patrick. That's an important aspect. Every A24 movie on Blu-ray, motherfuckers.
Right. Yeah,
but the pressure is working. I
watched this one on DVD. I don't know if I've watched any of these on Blu-ray yet, honestly.
The pressure is working. I don't know how long the writer's strike lasted before we started doing this, but within weeks of us switching formats, the writer's strike has been settled. So I will take credit for that.
Yep. We did a good thing.
I have it on good authority by someone, a friend of a podcaster I listen to, who's using like the Zodiac or astrology in some way to predict the end of the strike. They predicted the end of the writer's strike to the day. And they said that they believe, according to the stars, the actors' strike will be resolved by Halloween.
Oh.
So let's enjoy this month, guys.
Wow.
That doesn't give us a lot of time to review these movies.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we are here today to review my A24 pick, Climax. But before we get into that, I mean, we've had a busy month here, guys. We skipped an entire episode because we went on vacation. We went to New Orleans for Steven's birthday, and
we skipped out of town. Yeah,
we saw an incredibly memorable water ballet adaptation of Carrie, which I think is the most germane activity to the show that we did down in New Orleans.
Carrie, Blood in the Water.
Oh.
I found an ad for this in their kind of entertainment or alt weekly magazine. Thought $20. Let's see if the boys are into it. And you guys seemed pretty excited. I was a little on the fence. It was worth triple what we paid.
It fucking ruled.
I don't even know how to describe this experience. I mean, there were thrills, chills, spills. We saw someone set on fire right before our very eyes. We could feel the heat on our faces.
We saw hearts ripped out. Yeah. Although, was there actually blood in the water by the end? That was our big question. I don't think there ever was, right?
There was a red floodlight. I don't think they wanted any dye in the water.
Which makes sense. Yeah. But it gave us everything else short of blood in the water. It was a delightful, campy, very creative experience.
Yeah, it was essentially, I mean, it was a very stripped down, loosey-goosey, very queer adaptation of Carrie, in which, like, the actors, well, Carrie's on a swim team, you know, they got to make this fit somehow, and the actors kind of, like, act out a scene as they're moving around the pool, and there's some comedy thrown in and some queerness, as I mentioned. And then there's a punk rock band doing musical covers of like popular songs from the 70s and 80s. They would blast into a number and there would be an epic Busby Berkeley style musical number with synchronized swimming in the pool. And then they would resume with another little scene. And pretty much the second half of it was, you know, the most famous, you know, final prom scene from Carrie, which is where we saw someone set ablaze in front of us. It was fucking fantastic. If you're ever in New Orleans, look up Aquamob.
Yeah.
It's the name of the group that put this on.
Yeah, they adapted Alien last year for Halloween, which I would have absolutely loved to see, now having seen their take on Carrie. But maybe we'll have to go back down and see what they do for Halloween next year. Mm-hmm. So outside of our little jaunt down to New Orleans, what else have you been doing in the horror world, guys?
Well, this is kind of interesting because I watched something and so did Steven, and then you and I, Patrick, we watched something together. Maybe I'll open with those. I watched No One Will Save You on Hulu.
Yeah.
I've seen that now too, actually.
Oh, you've seen that now too? The gray alien home invasion thriller, which honestly, the less said about it, the better. I want to be a man of peace at the moment, so...
People are loving it. They're embracing it. The critics adore it. I've heard the director give a couple of really good interviews. He's been popping up on my horror podcast feed, but man, I thought this thing stunk to high heaven. I thought it was like everything that I hate about modern horror. The director's saying, like, I don't want to make a movie about trauma and grief. And that's like kind of exactly what it is. It's like there's There's like too much character and not enough aliens. And when we see the aliens, they're CG and they just ain't spooky.
So I liked it a little bit better than you guys, for sure. I did enjoy the aliens. I really, really appreciated Caitlin Dever's performance because the big gimmick with this movie is there's almost no dialogue in it. And it's really on her and just her face to carry this whole movie. And I thought she did that really well. But the ending just fell the fuck apart for me. I really didn't understand what it was trying to go for in the end, but definitely enjoyed it more, I think, than you two did up to that point.
Yeah, it really felt like the ending was sort of like a tacked on, like, oh, let's give this a theme. Let's make this about trauma because that's in right now. I don't know. Maybe I'm too cynical.
Right, and I didn't even understand what it was trying to say about that, if that was that did seem to be the theme, but I didn't understand what the point was exactly.
Yeah, it's really strange because, again, the performance is wordless. You kind of have to do which I appreciate, you have to do some work to kind of figure out this character. Nobody in the town will speak to her. A woman spits in her face. And you kind of have to, like, piece together, like, okay, what happened to her? Like, why is she so reviled? And then once that is, like, finally revealed...
You're like, I get it.
I was like, yeah, I not only do I get it, but also, like, this is the best you could come... Like, this is just so outlandish and absurd that I think I had to rewind it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize, like, oh, that's the moment we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
What a swing, I guess. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the moment we've been waiting for, Patrick and I saw Saw X, or Saw 10 if you're boring.
Oh, I thought it was Socks.
Well, that's your review. It's not the name of the movie.
Oh, yeah, that is my review, actually. It sucks.
I am not going to come on my podcast and talk shit about a Saw movie. I think it's beautiful that in this day and age, the year 2023, we got to see a new Saw movie open, led by Tobin Bell, with all the hallmarks of the Saw series in it in a pretty uncompromising fashion. I was with this movie and greatly enjoying this movie until about 20 minutes from the end, at which point bad decisions and filmmaking malpractice started to pile up and sent me out of the theater despondent and dismayed, much like Jigsaw at the beginning of the movie.
Wow, see, I've only ever left a Saw movie feeling despondent and dismayed, and I always thought that was kind of the point.
No, not like this.
Well, yeah, if you see this one, it'll really take you to new levels of that. I also was very disappointed with the ending of this and disliked much of what went before it a lot more than Chris did. Huge props to Tobin. He actually gets something to fucking do in this movie and shows that he is capable of that. But I don't know, it was just a weird kind of blend of like prestige drama almost. I mean, not even prestige, it's like a drama about Jigsaw and just his like body and his life falling apart for honestly way too long. And then when it like cranks up into Saw mode, it's just the traps were sort of underwhelming. The ending was just an absolute mind blower of a clusterfuck. I don't know. I was very disappointed in this, especially in comparison to the kind of rapturous response it's received from critics and fans.
Yeah, it got such great reviews, and so many people whose opinions I listened to liked it a lot, so I was going in with very high expectations. I want to know when the last time any of these people saw Saw or Saw 2 or even Saw 3 was, because this movie isn't on par with those. And the filmmakers were trying to make something that was more in the line of Saw and Saw 2 than the later sequels, but I want to know when the last time they watched those movies is too, because I can't imagine the way they build Jigsaw up to be so sympathetic in this movie, knowing it's an immediate prequel to Saw 2. Watch Saw 2. He's fucking heinous in Saw 2. Not the least of his crimes is abducting a young boy and keeping him in a safe to teach his dad a lesson, which seems very at odds with what happens in Saw X. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's this bizarre thing where I think it's gotten to the point where, it's almost that Michael Myers effect where it's like Michael Myers is the hero of Halloween at a certain point, because there's just so much fan like adoration for him. And I think Jigsaw has certainly reached that point where it's just like, we love Tobin, we love Jigsaw, and it's playing more on not necessarily the character of Jigsaw, but on our like love and sort of what we projected onto that character. And it's a very uncomfortable fit with any portrayal of him before, and kind of reflects in a really weird way on the fan base, honestly.
Well, yeah, it's like Jigsaw he is the de facto protagonist, basically. Even when he's dead in the movies, he's still sort of like the de facto protagonist, and we like him for the same reason people started rooting for Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers or any of those people. But the thing is, you can root for Freddy Krueger and also be aware that he's like fucked up and like shouldn't be killing people or whatever.
Yeah.
And here, like, this is trying to give you permission to root for Jigsaw in a sort of unsubtle way.
Yeah, weird movie.
Anyway,
Weird.
Could
movie.
talk about it for 90 minutes, but won't do that.
Steven, what else have you been watching or reading or whatevering?
I will plug the book club. It's back, though I haven't started our selection. I think I will have to be nearly finished with it by the time this ep comes out. We're doing Bad Brains by Kathy Koja, who happens to be a local Detroit area author who shot to fame in the early 90s for her kind of extreme, gritty, splatter punk-esque take on the horror genre. So I'm pretty excited to check that one out. It'll only be the second book of hers I've read. As far as horror film, I can't say I watched a movie because I didn't finish it, but I've been riding the gray train like Chris, and I started to check out The Fourth Kind the other night with some friends, and I texted Chris that it may be the worst movie I've ever seen.
That's a lie.
I have not heard good things about that.
So this is ostensibly this is based on a true story about this psychiatrist played by Mila Jovovich who finds out there's all these disappearances in a real life town called Nord, Alaska, and she starts to suspect that it's aliens that are abducting people. And in one of the most bafflingly constructed ways I've ever seen a film made, there is documentary footage and quote-unquote actual audio interspersed throughout the drama of this film. That is all entirely fake, even though this was marketed as being real. And it's, I think, done very poorly, but I can see how the average person who maybe doesn't have a great sense of like media literacy could be fooled, including one of the people I watched this movie with. And I think it's reprehensible. The town of Nord, Alaska was very upset about this movie as well, because there are disappearances there due to the harsh weather. And they thought it was despicable that filmmakers would try and cash in on that and make a movie saying that it's about aliens.
That's the harsh weather. The cold conditions up there are a cover-up for the alien activity.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, this is all presented as fact, and I got to talk about the filmmaking for a moment because it is so jarring. I mean, my jaw was on the floor for a lot of the hour of this that I watched. There's so much split screen in this movie, and split screen between the fake documentary footage and the actors playing the people that are supposedly real. And every time a new actor comes up, they get a title card. It doesn't matter if it's 45 minutes in the movie. It's Will Patton as Sheriff whatever. Like, he gets
I love
a
that.
card.
That's very Metal Gear Solid.
There are times when there are up to 4, I think maybe even more, different split screens going on the screen that are all different combinations of the events unfolding in the movie and alleged real footage that is supposed to prove that these events happened, that are all entirely fabricated. I thought it was just egregiously, despicably unethical, and I couldn't finish it. I mean, not only that, it's boring as hell. If you're looking for a scary alien movie, this is not the one for you. So that's the Fourth Kind. Man, what a doozy. Be curious if any of our listeners are fans and want to hop on the Discord to try and defend it. Patrick, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just hit a couple things because, I mean, obviously it's been 4 weeks since we last convened, and also it's spooky season, so I've just been binging all kinds of shit. But I'll give a quick shout out to a couple of things. I read a really amazing graphic novel called A Guest in the House. It's from the author Emily Carroll, who did the anthology Through the Woods, a couple of years ago, which absolutely ruled. We've talked about a few things so far in this episode that fall apart a little bit at the end, and this is another one in that vein. Like, it didn't quite pull everything together for me, but the visuals, the storytelling, the character work in this were just fascinating. It's about this woman, very introverted woman, who has kind of recently married a guy who just kind of has a bit of weird energy about him, and something happened to his previous wife. We're not quite sure what, and this woman is kind of trying to figure out what's going on in her house, what happened with this woman, what's going on with her husband and her new stepdaughter. And it was just really fascinating, very empathetic, beautiful use of the graphic novel format, and any kind of issues I had with where it wound up in the end, which were not necessarily offensive. It just it ends abruptly, was the main issue I had with it. But up to that point, it was just absolutely spellbinding. So would definitely recommend that, and just her work in general. She's incredible. And also recently cruised through the most recent season. I think it's now season 5 or 6 of What We Do in the Shadows. You've heard a lot about that show on this show before, but it still continues to just absolutely slap. This is, if anything, for an incredibly, incredibly weird show, it's probably the weirdest season they've done yet, and that was just an absolute delight. So if you are maybe a little behind on the show, just strong recommendation to catch up, because it's worth it. And if you haven't seen any of it, get started, because it's a blast.
It's a great show, and I really need to catch up on this season. The first episode was mental and lived up to my expectations, and I just have not had the time to get back to it. But it's spooky season. I've got no excuses.
Yeah, and it's, it goes quick, too. It's, 10, 20, 30-minute episodes. The last thing I'll give a shout out to is a little bit of Amon special content that's headed your way. As we mentioned, we skipped an episode, but we're going to make it up to you with a very, very special episode coming just 1 week after the episode you're listening to now comes out. So on October 26th, just in time for Halloween, we will be dropping an episode in which I, Allison with a Y, and our friends Rowan and Exilia from the It Slays podcast reviewed every single movie in the Paranormal Activity franchise. Chris and Steven, as you've heard before, said absolutely no to that mission, so we undertook it on our own. We've done a few of these franchise review eps in the past. We've done Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Final Destination. So we figured, here's a little Halloween treat, or maybe a trick. We'll see. But that's coming your way on the 26th. So I've been watching a lot of Paranormal Activity as well. But let's, now that we've done a half hour of catch-up, let's get down to brass tacks for today.
It's a lot of build-up. It's time to climax.
That's right. Gasper Noé's Climax. We've got a bunch of dancers locked in.
That's your
4
movie.
dead bodies.
That's your movie.
That's your movie. We got a bunch of dancers. They have come from all over the world to work with a kind of notable choreographer. They're in a kind of your typical industrial warehouse art space, and shit goes absolutely sideways when they drink some sangria that has been spiked with LSD. And that is your movie, basically.
That's your movie.
This is a vibes-based movie. This movie is very thin in the plot department. It's quite thin in the character department. We meet these characters through a little prologue in which they have sort of taped interviews for whatever this dancing choreography project that they're embarking on is. And so you hear an interviewer, who I guess is a choreographer or someone who works for them, speaking to each of the people that we'll see in the film, sort of about their background. And we get a sound bite or two from each of them, and just enough to sort of understand who these people are when you see them again. Then we see them again in a rousing dance number that is pretty sensational and well done. And they say, that was sensational and well done. That's a wrap. Let's drink. and it sort of just descends into chaos, both in the events of the movie and the filmmaking itself from there. And you're either with it and you like it or you don't.
So, Chris, would you view it or screw it?
I'll tell you probably pretty soon.
What was y'all's past experience with Gasper Noé?
None.
Okay. And you've seen Irreversible, at least,
he did
right,
the Nun,
Steven?
right?
Yes, he did the Nun. Yeah.
I've seen Irreversible. I actually I don't know if liked is the right word. It was very effective. I was surprised. It's a movie that is notorious for, I mean, among many other things. The crux of it is about a 20-minute rape scene that is one take. So like who wants to sit through that? But
it was a movie that I put off seeing for a long time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say it was within the last maybe 8 to 9 years that I finally watched it, and it came out like early 2000s.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Something like that, late 90s, and that's about it. I tried to watch Enter the Void and found it just too dark and grim and unpleasant, and I thought, this is the guy who brought us Irreversible. He's known for being kind of a bad boy and edgelord, and I just didn't feel like it was going to be redeeming enough to sit through the Trainspotting-esque grit and grime of that thing. What about you, Patrick?
Yeah, like I said, I've seen Irreversible, and it took me a long time to get around to it. I was very impressed and also found it very effective when I finally did. We were talking about this last night, Stephen. I am not sure if I've seen Enter the Void. I think I just saw the kind of famous opening title sequence, and I don't think I ever got around to actually seeing the movie. But suffice to say, Noé is known for being a transgressive, button-pushy, edgy kind of filmmaker. And he's actually kind of commented on how this has been his most, kind of turned out to be his most accessible, in some ways most successful and most critically appreciated film, which I think will tell you something, because it's still a fucking crazy-ass and very unusual, not particularly commercial movie. But it was made, the filmmaking process on this is really interesting. He just had kind of a basic concept of some dancers in a warehouse, drinking some spiked booze and seeing what happens from there. He says he was just interested in this idea of people creating something beautiful and artistic together and then just seeing it fall apart for some reason. And he cast primarily dancers who were not previously actors, and they didn't have a script. They just kind of made it up as they went along. It was a short shoot, 15 days. And he even kind of allowed them to improvise some of the things that happened to their characters' final fates. So it was this very like loosey-goosey kind of shooting experience, and the folks who worked on it have described it as for what winds up being a very heavy, depressing, grim movie as things go along, the folks who worked on it have described it as being like a very joyful, very fun shooting experience. So that really fascinated me, actually.
Yeah, and I feel like on the last episode, I talked about how I'm not a fan of long takes in films, and I feel like someone heard me, because this movie is long takes after long takes. It didn't bother me though. I thought they were like, I didn't really notice it. There were a few points where I'm like, I feel like this is a take that's been going on for a while. And then I got on Wikipedia and read there's like a 41-minute take, and it didn't draw that much attention to itself. And also the subject matter and the actors, like it really immerses you in the world and the textures of what's going on in this club. So I thought it was a fairly intelligent use of the long take thing, which otherwise kind of bothers me when I see it in a movie.
Yeah, it
That's
doesn't
funny.
like super call attention to itself. I want to say it kind of works on a more subconscious level where you're aware of kind of the immediacy of everything that's going on around you, but it's not necessarily show offy, which is kind of interesting. And it was just watching that. I mean, because the 40-minute take you referenced is basically the entire like freak out when the shit really goes down. Like the back half of this movie is that long take after a couple of other longer ones earlier in the movie. And I was just, my mind just kind of boggles at how you kind of choreograph that and put it together with like no script on this tight of a shooting schedule. It's just, yeah, kind of mind boggling, honestly, that he pulled it. And I mean, he shot this, like the camera was on his shoulder, like he is shooting throughout this. So it's not like he's elsewhere, like choreographing people or getting them ready for their blocking when somebody comes back through. I don't know. It's the creative process behind it is wild.
There's not that much to it, though. Like, you have a few characters who have to say or do something important at certain points, so you gotta make sure they know when they're gonna do it. But the rest of it's vibes. It's like, all right, everyone's fucking freaking out. Act freaky. You know? It's like if you took a camera through a haunted house attraction like 5 times in a row.
Yeah, I think he is a really good technical filmmaker, though, because one, I was gonna kind of jump on what Chris was saying a few minutes ago about like there were a couple points in this where I'm like, oh, I think this might be a long take situation. Am I just like not paying enough attention, and I think it is just that like he does it so well and so effortlessly and kind of subtly, but there's clearly like a different ethos in how he shot like the first chapter. Oh, yeah. Right, because I think we get an introduction, 2 chapters, and then an epilogue. The first chapter is very elegant, and the camera's very glidey and moving. You feel like you're at a party. It's fun. It's effervescent. And then when shit goes real, the camera like doesn't know where to look sometimes, you know, and it's stumbling around like the characters are while they're all fucked up on the LSD. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of jarring effect, the way that he chose to shoot those 2 sequences differently.
Yeah, for sure.
Did it blow my mind? No, but it's good filmmaking, I think.
Yeah. I want to go back to what Chris was talking about with kind of the opening interviews, which are, I don't know, interesting. There's so many fucking characters in this movie. You know what, like 20 probably dancers,
something like that.
Yeah.
And there's an interview clip with pretty much all of them, and it's impossible to track more than like, I don't know, 5, 6 maybe characters. I had extreme trouble keeping track, and I feel like anybody would have trouble keeping track of who's who, what their like weird little quirks are, and what their motivations are. I got really confused by that. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was confused. I never felt like I was. I just felt like, okay, I've got to pick my favorites, you know, the ones that I'm going to pay attention to. And some of them are like background and don't even have any lines during the party, or very few lines. There's one particular dancer who, like, I don't remember his interview, but he does these like crazy, like robotic Javier Botet-esque dances. You know, he's like jerking his head around in ways that don't seem physically possible, while also moving his arms in different direction. Like, I kind of latched onto him, even though he didn't really seem to play much of a part in the action. I was really interested in the the brother-sister duo from their interview. It was very clear that there's something a little more going on there, and I was both curious and kind of afraid to find out what that might be. I'm curious about you guys, who you might have latched onto in this, if anyone.
I mean, you know, Sofia Boutella is the ostensible kind of lead. Yeah, the mummy, the new mummy, is the ostensible lead of this, and she comes across well.
Ardith Bae, B-A-E.
Yeah. The choreographer was a sympathetic character to me, especially because she puts out the sangria that gets spiked by whoever and kind of gets blamed for it, and her life and her child's life go to absolute shit as a result. But I found her an engaging character.
Well, but speaking of engaging characters, I mean, as I said to Patrick last night one, we should have a separate award at our year-end show for the Mr. Banku of the year.
Spirit of Banku.
Spirit of Banku. The little Tito had some big Banku energy in this, and it was compelling and horrifying and at times hilarious to see how a child fits into this nightmare scenario.
Yeah, we can probably explain his fate in the spoiler electrical closet, I suppose.
We must.
I mean, certain characters get your sympathies more than other as the action plays out. But early on, there was no one I latched onto. Those video interviews were just sort of setting the stage for me. Basically, I didn't expect to be tested on it, so I wasn't really even trying to remember everybody. More interesting to me than the people on the screen was how the TV was framed with books on one side and movies on the other side. And if you're wondering what this movie's influences are, just it's all right there. It couldn't be more obvious.
Oh, and there's a big shout out to, I mean, Suspiria is an obvious one, but Possession is also up there, and I could definitely see the influence of that in the second chapter of this when
La La Land is up there.
1920 London. I mean,
I do have to give the actors some props. I mean, for being dancers, and I mean incredible dancers. Like, obviously these are professional dancers, and there's fucking insane dancing in this movie. But for the most part, I thought the performances were pretty decent for people who hadn't acted before. You know, I mean, Butella is an actor and was an actor prior to this movie, and I think he put her in the lead-ish role for a reason. But everybody else felt fairly natural to me. There are a lot of very unlikable characters in this movie, but I thought they came across pretty well, especially for being mostly first-timers at that game.
You know what? I'm going to say something that might be totally ignorant and uninformed. I think if you can dance, you can act.
I think that's pretty on point.
I think so too, and like there's been a lot made of like they have this whole cast has zero acting experience. I'm like, you're gonna tell me you learned to dance and you weren't in a fucking play at some point and had a line or two? Like, I think that was a little bit more of a promotional thing. But I agree.
That
I
sounds
think
like some bullshit. Yeah, I want a forensic audit of their resumes.
Well, I think the point is more none of them have film credits. You know.
Sure, but I do think that like if you can work with your body in the way that these people can. You know, that is just that is a very similar form of expression to what we call like acting, stage acting or film acting. You're not using your words, you're using your body to convey meaning and emotion. And I thought everyone seemed, pretty natural, except for, you know, it made a lot of sense. I didn't know going into the movie that was the case. It made a lot of sense when I thought back on the scene where people are just sitting around talking about fucking for like 20 minutes. And like, there's
a lot of talk about fucking in this movie.
These guys are clearly, it was almost, at times it was almost like, you know, if you've got like extras on a film set and they've got to make up their own conversation in the background to look like they're talking and they're just kind of saying nonsense to each other and trying to make each other break. There's a lot of that energy going on. And while I did find it entertaining, it didn't really add any substance at all to the proceedings for me.
I don't even know, because honestly, none of this, the back half of this movie is just an acid trip. And very little of what you hear or learn about any of these characters, whether it's in their tapes or in their talking to each other or about having sex or whatever, is germane to anything that happens after it. I think it's kind of like Big Brother or something, where you're like, you have the little, everyone's got their little moment in the confessional, so you decide who you're going to root for, and then they just all go wild in the hamster wheel or whatever, and you get to pick your favorites and kind of track them.
That is, I mean, it sounds like from what Patrick was saying in his setup to this, it sounds like that's all the intent was. Let's watch a group of people like combine together for a common goal, and it goes bad. Like, I don't know that there's really like a message here. I don't know that any of like the character arcs, if they even exist, are really all that compelling or revelatory. It's just it does what it says on the tin, as the Brits would say.
Yeah.
A French film, and proud of it.
Yeah.
That's one of the many sort of ostentatious title cards that appears on the screen.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of credits.
And my thought was, wow, thanks. I would have never guessed this was a French film.
Yeah, well, considering that when that title comes up, there's an enormous sequined French flag covering the entire background of the staging area that they're in, just to hammer it home even further.
Did you guys think it was weird? There's a part where there's two characters, black characters, and they keep talking about the flag that's on the wall that's disturbing them, but we don't ever see it, I don't think.
That's what they're talking about. Is
Oh
that
yeah, I
big
assume the French flag. Yeah.
Oh, they're talking about the big sequin French flag? Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was weirder when they were talking about eating ass, and one of them's talking about being into it, and then 5 minutes later, while they're still talking about it, he's like, I would never do that. Maybe that was the acid kicking in. He forgot.
It's weird, and it's like, it's just cut. They just put like a couple frames of black over all their cuts, so you see where they cut. They don't care.
Oh, I liked that actually. That's only a certain point in the movie, isn't that? Kind of as the acid is kicking in. I think that's kind of for effect, like to. And it was effective to me as far as like that weird, it created that sense of like, I don't know, when you're like smoking weed or something and it seems like time keeps resetting. That was kind of what that felt like.
Does that happen when you're on acid? You lose frames?
I don't know about acid.
I don't know, but does it happen in the Phantom Zone, Chris? Does that sound familiar to you?
I can account for all 20 years I was in that Phantom Zone.
No, I thought that was kind of cool too. I mean, yes, it is practical in that like they have to cut these like long takes that they're doing with these actors improvising, but it did give me this kind of time dilating sort of feeling, and it's almost and it kind of ratchets up, and it feels like this kind of slow strobing effect over time before it fully descends into chaos.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a way of finding a way to cut around this that was also, you know, not thematic, but it made sense for what was happening in these characters' minds.
Yeah, because everybody's getting real paranoid at that point and starting to, things are starting to fall apart there.
But already, and like in the conversations, I'm getting, because it's the movie's tipping its hand that it's, you know, a very experimental sort of film, and I'm like, okay, well, what's the interesting element to this experimentation? Like, are you just going to show me a whole bunch of people talking about drugs and sex? And that's
Chris,
that's it.
Is this mumble horror?
I guess, yeah, it might be mumblecore. Well, it is mumblecore. We know that.
I'm just surprised that term hasn't come up. But yeah, I mean, that's to say, it doesn't seem like there's anything more to the experimentation. Like I'd be surprised if Gasper Noé has a thesis that he set out with this film that he didn't pull out of his ass in a press junket.
No, I can confirm that he doesn't. He said as much.
Okay,
he's just trying to be he's trying to be a provocateur, but the stuff he's showing me isn't even really provocative. So not only does it not have a point, it's not provocative. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Are you just
How is it
wasting our
not
time?
provocative? Or what do you mean when you say it's not provocative?
I mean, it didn't shock me or stimulate me intellectually. Neither of the two. Like to just like, oh, I'm going to linger in this party for a while. I mean, before things get crazy, then I see how you could say, oh, it's provocative or whatever. But just all the table setting, maybe it felt longer than it was. Maybe it wasn't that long. But just having all these characters saying frivolous stuff to each other, it's boring. I'm like, damn, this reminds me of like just going to some party where I don't know anybody and listening to conversations I don't give a fuck about. Except I can't go home. I'm already home. And I gotta finish this movie for a podcast.
I didn't find it boring, but I did find the wind up to the, you know, kind of the acid trip and the meltdown was much longer than I remembered it being. I kind of thought that shit got crazy sooner. I mean, it's still like, yeah, what the last half of the movie we keep saying is that, but I don't know. I guess I remembered more of the movie being that from the first time I saw it.
It's probably more than half the movie. I don't know. And also, there's various levels to the acid trip. Like, there's a good section of this movie where everybody's just vibing and mostly having a good time, and they're just fucked up and seemingly drunk.
Yeah,
there's that too.
That was my favorite stuff in the movie, honestly. I felt very easygoing. I felt like a voyeur, fly on the wall. These people are all, you know, beautiful and talented and having fun, letting loose. I thought it was a good hang. Everything after that I thought was kind of belabored and like intentionally trying to be provocative and shocking. And I think I'm with Chris. It didn't really work on me. I have a
I'm like,
couple of.
I just got out of
images I wrote
Saw
in my notes.
X. Like,
Did Saw X shock you more than this movie?
I don't know. I would say I had the same emotional response for the most part to both of them. There was one part of this movie that got under my skin a little bit, but yeah.
Because and I mean, we should probably move towards the spoiler room so that we can actually kind of talk about the specifics of what happens during this freak out. But like, it is very visceral and very unsettling for me. Even, I mean, it's interesting because I think people would describe this as a violent movie. I think it's been described as a violent movie, but there's not a lot of violence,
right.
In part just because of, I think kind of the semi-improvised nature of all this. So it's not like you can really plan out a lot of like super gory shit or anything, but just the way everything comes apart and everyone is accusing people of shit they didn't do, and just the way the camera wanders back and forth between rooms and the way things have progressed since the last time you were in that room is just deeply, deeply unsettling and feels very real to me in a way that has probably set my desire to try acid at some point back by another 5 to 10 years, even though I had seen this before.
Yeah, there's not a lot of violence, but it's consequential violence when it happens, and the movie feels so naturalistic, sort of, that you're like, oh god, like this feels like I'm at a party and something bad just happened. This is the events of this movie are what my mom thought would happen if I ever went to a party with alcohol.
Yeah.
So
this is probably what my mom still thinks happens when I go to a party with alcohol.
Yeah.
This is what I thought was going to happen in NOLA.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed.
Instead, you just got the lighthouse.
Yeah.
Well, let's review this motherfucker and talk about what actually does happen during this whole acid trip. Steven, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give this a screw it. I couldn't recommend it to anybody. I enjoyed the hangout aspect of part of it, but I didn't feel like it really paid off. And I think it's shockingly less disturbing than I expected, given that it's a Gasper Noé movie, and that's kind of how his movies are marketed. He's going to show you things that shouldn't be seen, that you don't want to see. And I found actually some of the violence and some of the events that happen after everybody starts freaking out, like I laughed a couple of times, and I don't think I was supposed to. I felt very disconnected from it, ultimately because I could feel that there really wasn't a point to it, and that's just not a kind of filmmaking that I seek out or that I respond to very well. Chris, you would cue it or screw it?
Yeah, I'll have to mostly co-sign what you said. I have to give it a screw it. I didn't hate it. I saw a lot of really polarizing reviews of this movie. You know, people are saying this movie's trash. This movie's I didn't hate it. It just what was there that worked for me was just it was few and far between, and it just felt like a movie that was deliberately wasting my time. Like, and I didn't get on board with that. Like, if I want to see something shocking or see a good dance number or any of the things that this movie brings to the table, I can do it in other movies and have the same emotional response, if not more, but actually get a movie out of it. So I didn't hate it, but I felt the hand on my shoulder of this provocateur being like, oh, aren't I transgressive for just making this? And it didn't charm me. I've been to a lot of student film festivals and 48-hour film festivals in my life, and it's not that crazy to be like, oh, we're going to do a long take of a party going wrong and who spiked the punch, and we're going to end the movie showing you who spiked the punch. And it just seemed like a more expensive version of that sort of thing that I've seen before and is quite juvenile. And that makes it sound like I hated it, which maybe
You've seen that before?
Oh yeah, that sort of thing. So I hate the intent behind this movie more than I hated the actual movie, I think. But it's not something I'm going to watch again, nor would I recommend it to anybody else. So screw it. Patrick.
In regards to what you just said, I would almost completely reverse that statement. I like the intent behind it almost more than I like the movie. I like that he just had this sort of vague, strange idea and made it up as he went along. I love when a director just does what they fucking feel like doing. And I enjoy this a lot on that level. I totally understand why pretty much anyone wouldn't respond to it, because it's a weird and idiosyncratic movie for sure. But I love it. It feels very singular to me. In contrast to your student film statement, I've never seen anything like this. And even though it gets a little draggy in parts for me, especially those interviews that we were talking about, and it is hard to track this cast of characters at times, I don't know, it's just a very, very singular experience to me. It was especially kind of staggering to watch in a theater, which I did the first time, and it was still really gripping and shocking and unusual to me this second time around. So I'm actually going to give it a view it, which is weird because it's also not something that I would actively recommend to anyone, obviously. I mean, in the sense of like, I wouldn't recommend it to everyone is more what I mean. But I love this movie, so I'll give it a view it.
All right.
Well, we are going to head down to the spoiler electrical closet and spoil all the shit that goes down during this acid trip. But before we do that, I will remind you to follow us on social media. We are at EHMONcast, EHMONcast, on Facebook, Instagram, and the site formerly known as Twitter. You can go to our broken website, everyhorrormovieonnetflix.com, and see a list of at least some of the movies that we've watched over the years. You can also access our merch store from the website, where you can get a t-shirt or coffee mug or other goods with Amon art on them. And lastly, follow us and review us on your podcast provider of choice. Those reviews in particular are great for us because they give us feedback and also help people find the show. All right, you guys ready to go spoil the climax of Climax?
Yes. Was there a climax in Climax?
I would say absolutely yes. Jesus fuck. Let's go do it. Welcome back. We are in the spoiler room, and we are ready to spoil everything about Climax. And I mean, there's just a lot. There's a lot of fucked up shit that goes down in this film. I mean, I feel like the most obvious go-to point is the Mr. Banku of 2023, Tito, the small child son of the choreographer, ends up drinking the fucking sangria and also tripping out on LSD, and his mom locks him in an electrical closet to his mom, who of course is also tripping at this point, locks him in an electrical closet to theoretically protect him from the chaos going on around
everybody
him.
else who's on acid, because they're looking at him like he might taste pretty good if we put him in the oven for a few minutes.
Yeah. And his like screams from the electrical closet become just kind of a recurring auditory motif as the camera and characters float from room to room. You just know bad shit is going on for this kid. He's screaming at one point about cockroaches being in the closet, which of course, who knows if they're actually there, if he's just hallucinating those. And eventually the lights go out in the place, and somebody says that he's fried himself by messing with the controls in the electrical closet, which seems to be borne out by a shot that we see of him later in the movie, apparently having died in the closet.
And that was sort of the most chilling part of the movie for me, when the power goes out and someone says, like, you can't tell if he's serious or not, like, oh, Mr. Banku fried himself, the power's out. But since, like, that Chekhov's gun electrical cabinet has been there for so long, you're like, he probably did fucking kill himself, didn't he?
Oh, before the character even said that, I was like, the power went out. Oh, he's dead.
Yeah.
And like, power going out is just an excuse for the rest of the movie to be just in red emergency lights.
Yeah.
There's no narrative reason for the camera to be fucking upside down for the rest of the movie.
Narrative? No. I mean, why would there be a narrative reason for it to be upside down? It's for aesthetic purposes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know, Steven and I were talking about this last night. Like, we've discussed before kind of differing views on children in peril or dead children in movies. And I usually react more strongly to those moments. And I reacted strongly to this, but didn't necessarily find it exploitative, even though if I look at it, it's just like, okay, like, obviously, this is just like, I mean, talk about provocateurism, like this director clearly trying to push my buttons. And yet I didn't respond to it with that kind of anger. I just responded to it with sort of shock. I guess because it maybe made sense that this choreographer would have her kid there and that like he would be oblivious to what was going on and like try the booze. I was at a wedding this weekend and a kid almost drank my beer, so like I could see how this would happen, you know. But I don't know, it's still like something where almost like intellectually I'm like, I should be like, fuck you, Gaspar, like this is over the top and unnecessary, but for some reason that's not the way I responded to it emotionally, and I don't know why that was.
I think this is a movie where you need to have something human and relatable to anchor yourself through all the chaos, because make no mistake, this is all fucked up people, most of whom are assholes, screaming, writhing, doing weird shit for an hour. And to have these little moments where you have an objectively innocent and relatively sober character, like I think he drinks a little bit of sangria, like he is under the effect of LSD by the end of it, but not through any fault of his own or whatever. But you have this like innocent character and then a mother who's like fucked up but trying to keep it together enough to take care of her kid. That's drama. And it's relatable because when we go to parties and stuff and something fucked up happens, like, I don't know, it feels like something that could happen, and it feels like something that you can invest yourself in and care about amidst everything else going on, which is pretty arbitrary. And so I think maybe that's why it doesn't feel super exploitive, at least to me.
I think that's a good summary. I think that crystallizes some of my thought process around it pretty well.
There's a couple little mini dramas like that. You know, we find out another woman who's suspected of poisoning the punch because she didn't drink it is pregnant. And there's a little micro drama where the mummy is trying to talk to her about being a mommy. And they're like, oh, what are we going to do? But like the mummy's fucked up, but like trying to be a good friend in this moment. And then like someone else comes in and just like brutalizes the shit out of this woman because she assumes that she's been spiking the punch.
So pregnant woman gets the shit kicked out of her.
I did read a review on Letterboxd that said this movie has pretty foul gender and racial politics. And so I was kind of looking with an eyebrow raised at some of the depictions in here. And I do think there's a little bit of an uneven balance of the races of the sympathetic characters versus the characters who are portrayed as more brutal or animalistic.
But I mean, that's all I'm sure interesting to look into, but considering that this was mostly improvised by the actors themselves,
it's just like that.
It could just be coincidental. Like that's like with everything in this movie. I just don't think there's anything deeper to it.
That's a good point.
I mean, they mostly, from what I understand, made up their own character details. He looked to them to ask them like how they wanted to treat other characters, and then would consult those actors and be like, hey, is it okay if this person kicks you or whatever? And they would kind of build on it iteratively in that fashion. So I don't know. I'm not too sure about racial or gender politics because I'm not sure that there are any. And also, like, I don't know, kind of everyone just sucks in this anyways.
Everyone sucks. There was one thing where I was kind of looking for a theme and a thread and an idea. There is a lot of talk about abortion in this movie. It comes up a bunch of times. Not just abortion, but also, motherhood and taking care of a child. We see that borne out in what happens to poor Tito, because his mom gets fucked up by accident and can't cut it. But again, it didn't really lead anywhere where by the end of it, I was like, I should really spend some time thinking about what this movie has to say about a woman's right to choose, because it just seems like that's a topic of conversation everywhere.
Yeah, it's like a Rorschach blot. There's certainly if I could put together various things along the theme of like bodily autonomy in this movie, but is it saying anything? Is it intentional? I don't think so.
No. Anything it's saying, frankly, is kind of accidental. I mean, again, like the only thing he set out to do with this was portray a group of people creating something and then it falling apart, and everything else is just kind of incidental. And it is, I think Rorschach blot is a good reference point. But I'm trying to think what else happens in this that's sort of notable. I mean, like, I wasn't even clear, honestly, in the end of who spiked the punch. You referenced that before, Chris. Like, who was it clear to you who actually did that in the end?
Yeah, after all the dust clears, there's a little epilogue, and the last shot of the movie is you see the like tall blonde German.
Oh
person,
yeah.
And she's got like a LSD textbook in her purse, and she's putting LSD drops in her eyes, and the movie's like, gotcha, and that's the end of the movie.
And she's the one who she said in her interview she had to leave Berlin because there were too many drugs and her friend was putting acid in his eye.
Right. I just read that.
Funny.
I just read that as though the experience in the warehouse had actually turned her on to doing that. I didn't read it as she was the one who spiked it.
Oh, I think it's like taking place in one of the rooms in this compound. I didn't think it was like this is after the fact, but who's to say? I don't know. But yeah, it's just writhing, screaming.
Yeah, writhing, screaming. There's a pretty cool bit with the mummy. I like that we're calling her that now, Ardeth Bay. She has a very cool like dancey scene as she's not actively dancing, but she's reacting in a very dance-like way to the horror around her and to her trip. And I watched a behind-the-scenes featurette about that. They had a choreographer who is literally behind the camera, like giving her direction in the moment. They shot, I think, 7 takes or something like that. It's cool. I enjoyed that.
That was where I saw the strongest allusion to the movie Possession, actually, was during that sequence. Because there's a lot of like balletic type movement in that movie that's sort of at odds with what's really happening to the characters.
I need to finally watch that.
I'll keep talking about it until you do.
Yeah. I want to see it.
I like that segment of this movie. It was a strong performance, and it goes on for a long time. One take.
Yeah.
She's acting like she's got bugs under her skin.
I mean, I think it's part of the mega take, right? Isn't that within like the sort of giant 42-minute take, I think?
Yeah, oh my god, I just remembered where we also, like in Carry Blood in the Water, see somebody get set on fire.
Yeah, that was pretty wild too. And then you later see her like fucking burn scalp and her just like trying to scratch it because it itches, and then of course it hurts when she scratches it, and that was horrifying. But yeah, basically everybody gets pretty well fucked up by the end of this. Kind of unclear who's actually dead and who's not in some cases, but it's knocks pretty much everybody out of commission by the time the police get there. Oh, we find out the brother and sister there's an incestuous thing going on there. Some fight breaks out because of that. I don't know.
Well, don't we see him trying to fuck her?
Yeah.
Which I feel like, I mean, it did not surprise me because I felt like that's been going on this whole time. We just haven't actually seen it. And Gasper Noé's like, we're not just going to talk about incest. I'm going to rub your face in it. It's kind of gross and pointless.
It's hard to say. It's really hard to, especially once the camera turns upside down. It's hard to tell who's writhing on who's puking, who's shitting.
Well, you're supposed to stand on your head for that portion of the film. It's a lot easier to tell what's going on.
Yeah. Which, hey, whatever. This all really happened, though, on the set of Titanic, by the way.
Yes, right? Somebody spiked the chowder or whatever.
Yeah, someone spiked the chowder with PCP and everyone got fucked up except for James Cameron, who probably because he had so much experience with hallucinogens along the Colorado River doing window pane acid, he recognized the symptoms and threw up. And so he was mildly affected, but a lot of the crew was hospitalized.
Well, this is also based on, I mean, loosely based on something that actually happened. I think it was just, obviously there was not like a fucking massacre like there is in this, but there was, I think, a group of dancers who accidentally took LSD in a warehouse or something. I think that's pretty much where the story ends, but it did actually happen in 1996. That's referenced in one of the many credit sequences.
It sounds like a group of people trying to pretend to the police that they didn't plan a rave.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Huh. Well, listen, now that we're down here in the spoiler room and it's just us, what's the most fucked up thing you've seen at a party like this?
I've never been to a party quite like this.
Right, but any party, me neither, but any party where there's lots of alcohol or drugs and then the party goes fucking wrong.
I'm sure you have one.
Well, I was assuming. I don't know. I mean,
nothing leaps to mind for me. So I figured if you had something in mind, share it, and I'll see if I can come up with something in the meantime.
I remember one time there was like a speakeasy where I went to college, where it's like after the bar closed, you'd go down the street into some basement in the downtown where these like random people were running their own bar. And I was down there and like there were narrow wooden stairs to get down into the basement. And at some point during the party, some guy like fell down the stairs and like broke his leg or something.
Damn.
And he was fucked up already. And he's just like laying on the stairs, like with his broken leg. And his brother was there and like not knowing what to do. And the people who owned the bar, quote unquote, owned the bar, came over and were like, you need to get him the fuck out of here. And they're like, his leg's broken. And it was like just a very dark situation. And then I think the paramedics ended up being called and like actual ambulance came and took him off the stairs. And I think it resulted in that place getting closed down as it should have been. But I don't know. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm just thinking of like things where you're out of your element, you're having a quote unquote good time, and you look over and then you just see something that's like, oh, this isn't good.
I mean, honestly, this is reminding me, we talked about New Orleans earlier, and this is reminding me of my many experiences along those lines on the giant party that is Bourbon Street. I just am flashing back to the first time Steven and I went there about 10 or 15 years ago.
God, yeah.
And we were there, I don't know, probably like a Wednesday through Sunday or something. And because it was our first time, we didn't know any better. We went to Bourbon every night. And
oh no.
And it just, it picks up.
You didn't know better after the first night?
Well, it's chiller earlier in the week, and then it gets more and more crazy every night. And by the Saturday night that we were there, it was just packed. And, we were trying to have a good time. We went to some seedy places, and we were walking down Bourbon and just saw like an ambulance driving through, like pushing through this giant mass, the sea of humanity that was swarming on Bourbon, and saw a paramedic leading a dude with his shirt off to the ambulance, and it was all in silhouette because of the lighting, so we couldn't tell exactly what had happened, but there was something hanging out of this guy's arm, whether it was a syringe or a knife or something. And on top of the already oppressive atmosphere that is Bourbon, like our group all just kind of looked at each other and were like, yup, it's time to quit this fucking scene. And we left Bourbon immediately and went to a much chiller Australian themed bar and spent the rest of the night there.
And we had a delightful time there drinking Foster's.
Hell yeah.
I have a couple of quick ones. One, I went to this techno show at Ziggy's in Ipsy like 5 years ago and got invited to an after party in a house that had easily 200 people in it. And if you think of any house in the vicinity, that's too many. Like, it doesn't seem feasible, and yet somehow people were stacked inside and outside, and the energy was very cokey and druggy, and I was just kind of like with a couple of friends having a beer, just like looking around like, yeah, pretty bad vibes here. We should probably get out. And I tried to leave, and I opened a door that led outside but did not lead to an exit. It led to like a little courtyard, and all the lights were off it, but I could tell there was a group of people standing in a circle watching someone inject a woman with heroin.
Whoa.
And trying to convince her that it was a good idea, and that
Jesus.
Yeah, so that was pretty scary. Another one actually was at a party of a friend of ours in high school. You guys both might have been there.
Yeah, I don't know if I was there. I know the story, and it's like I've heard the story so many times. I sort of have a false memory. I might have been there, or I might have a false memory of being there, but I could have easily been there.
My high school friend who had moved away and had gotten into drugs, but I didn't know, overdosed on Robitussin and was on the floor. And this is a party where, like, we were not drinking. This was a completely sober party. We're listening to the B-52s and chatting it up and having a good time. And I turn over, and he's on the ground having a seizure and frothing at the mouth, and no one knew what to do. So we had to talk to the party host's mother, wake her up out of bed, because she's a registered nurse, mandated reporter, and sort the scenario out. But yeah, I know well that feeling of when a good time turns dark. And I think Climax captures that fairly well.
Yeah.
For what it is. It has. I've never had a bad trip, but it is kind of what I imagine that would be like too.
Yeah. Oh man, now I'm thinking of others, but I'm going to tell you guys off cast. It's not for listeners' ears.
Yeah, just don't party.
Ever.
Don't party. Do not come. Do not come to the party.
All right, so Steven, what A24 film are we watching for next episode?
We are going to watch the 2015 horror thriller directed by Oz Perkins, son of famous actor Tony Perkins, Norman Bates himself. We're watching The Black Coat's Daughter.
Oh, I've heard good things about that, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I'll read the plot description here on Google. During the dead of winter, a troubled young woman, Emma Roberts, embarks on a mysterious journey to an isolated prep school where two stranded students, Kiernan Shipka and Lucy Boynton, face a sinister threat from an unseen evil force. I've heard really good things about this. It seems like it might have Halloween energy, which I think would be appropriate for when that episode is going to air. So,
oh man,
2 weeks. The Black Coat's Daughter. Get ready, folks.
Is it
great.
Is it kosher to watch a film starring SAG strike scab Emma Roberts right now?
I didn't hear that she was scabbing.
She and Ryan Murphy and everybody else cross picket lines to finish the new American Horror Story season. I am joking. Like we'll watch that movie. Obviously, I'm not trying to call it into question, but mostly.
We should talk.
I just want to shade the cast of American Horror Story delicate while we have a second here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
we name and shame on this show.
Yeah, we'll be talking shit for sure. And also fuck everything related to American Horror Story. How could you think that that's important enough to break strike lines for?
I do like that show, but I haven't watched it in a few seasons now. Anyways, we'll be watching The Black Coat's Daughter next episode. Be there, be square, and make sure you're there for Paranormal Activity in between this episode and the Black Coat's Daughter episode. Until then, I'm Patrick.
I'm Chris.
I'm Steven.
We'll see you next time.
The real American horror story is that millions of workers are not getting the wages and benefits that they deserve.